Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Susan Greene, editor of the Colorado Independent, and we at the Independent typically have monthly events that are open to the public with live audiences and questions and answers, and this month we're doing something a little bit different. We're having a much more intimate discussion with two guests, Representative Amy Stevens and Representative Dicky Hullinghorst, and who's the state majority leader, are here today to discuss what everybody is discussing this election season, women's issues. We're not only discussing women's issues, but we're discussing how women's issues are being discussed. So both of our guests, thank you very much for being with us, and I'd like this conversation to be as free-flowing as possible, and I'd like you to speak with two hats. One hat as your political hat, the hat that you wear as a public servant, and the other is just as a woman who is a consumer of news or advertisements or watches politics or has friends or mothers or sisters, women who are affected by the issues that are being discussed in this election. Okay? So, Colorado was one of the leading first states in the nation to embrace suffrage, and we also have never had a woman in the governor's seat. We've also never had a woman in the U.S. Senate seat. Representative Stevens was running for the U.S. Senate seat to challenge Senator Mark Udall until February.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What happened?
Congressman Gardner decided to get in the race and spoke with me about that. And certainly to me it was quite a surprise. And I think that, look, politics, however that all plays out, there's different reasons people get in a race, right? I think that Mark Udall was being quite perceived as being a weak candidate. At the same time, and I know because I spoke with Corey many months prior to having announced, where do you see yourself? And I think at the time he wasn't sure, though he'd been courted, right? I mean, people were talking to him all the time, whether it was governor or whether it was Senate. But then he decided to get in, and I really felt, with Corey's background, certainly as a congressman, and I know we list all Congress people as A-list kind of candidates, state reps would be B, on down you go. But anyway, I felt Corey could take on Mark Udall effectively and well, and so I decided that I would step aside for him to get in the race. And I guess that's what we'll later talk about, how effective is it or isn't it, but I do feel that that was the right decision.
Got it. So to start out, before we get into actually specific issues, let's talk about why women are why women's issues are coming up the way they are this election season, why the women's vote is so sought after and so important. Can you just talk about your views on that?
Well, women's rights are very important, and they come up in one way or another. I think every election, women represent a very large portion of the voting population, probably over 50%. I believe the statistics indicate that women vote more than men do. So it's just obvious that you would have a number of issues every election that involve women. But these years are very important, the last few elections, because there really has been a war on women's issues, in my opinion, particularly choice and reproductive health rights. And we've seen a great deal of activity on that issue from the right, from the extreme right. 3 out of the last 4 general elections, there's been a personhood initiative on the ballot. We have one this year. This is the 3rd one. The last 2 in 2008 and 2010 were defeated by a huge margin, over 70%. But we see it again.
Amendment 67.
and Amendment 67. And so there's a lot of activity on the part of women and others against that and for it. And so clearly that sets the tone for women's issues in this election. There are many other issues that are women's issues. Education, good schools, child care, and we're hearing a lot about both of those in the election. We also see a lot of talk about economic equity, equal pay for equal work, and women do not receive equal pay for equal work now. I've heard many of our candidates, including the senatorial candidates, speak of many of those issues. So we always have women's issues because they're a very important part of the electorate, and they're always something that we need to address. But it's particularly difficult right now because there is such a strong effort on what I consider fairly extreme fringe of the Republican Party to take away women's choice. And we've been working on that issue for a very long time.
Got it. When you hear the words, there's a war on women, what is your response?
Well, I think much of this has been manufactured. I think a lot of people in my party think it's been manufactured. Though let's not forget that we do have issues that we certainly want to address. I think you're talking in the political sense of war on women. But women and where they've evolved, particularly I think over the last 25 to 30 years, we have more women in medical school today than men. We have more women in law school today. We have women's roles who've been evolving very much in terms of being certainly in the workforce and looking for flexible career choices. A lot of women take care of their children and their family, work part-time, maybe evolve when the kids are older into a full-time job. So we do have a lot of women's issues. And women certainly here in Colorado do determine the vote. There are, I believe, a number of issues that women talk to me about, and certainly I know in Dicky Lee's party they do too. Women that talk to me are also talking about economic and job opportunities. They are talking about starting their own business, really well over, I would say right now, women account for in terms of their own businesses, right? A huge amount within the United States. Many are becoming actually very successful and doing very well. Women want to look at economic opportunity and where that's going to lie. And it lies far beyond their reproductive system, okay? And I think that this is, I think, what's been quite frustrating in this election season. We hear about, I know Dicky Lee feels any, attempt at a personhood or something that tries to define life and when does it begin is somehow extreme. I don't think the majority of Americans actually think that. I think what a lot of Americans find extreme is in some ways abortion at any time, any way. And so the discussion has seemed to move here at the beginning. As opposed to, and I'm kind of more of a take a bit at a time, I don't understand why we're not talking about abortion really at the end, 6 months and on, past 20-something weeks. You're talking about almost fully formed babies. And we still talk about late-term abortion and practice it in the United States, which I think most Americans find barbaric. So we have, if you want to talk extreme, I think we have, I think a very different viewpoint. And what I've been amused at in many of the ads is, everything's too extreme for Colorado. And I actually find that insulting because I really think the majority of women are actually probably more middle of the road and saying, this is extreme and this is extreme. Please speak to me.
Yeah. So, I have to differ a little bit with you here, Amy, because quite frankly, that's not what the measures say. The measures are personhood measures, which define life at conception. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe that, and I don't believe that a majority of the women or men in this country believe that. If you believe that, you would be totally against abortion for any reason. Which some people are who run these amendments. This is a very extreme point of view, and it not only impacts the right for a woman to decide for herself what she's going to do with her body, with the advice of her doctor and her family and her God. All of those things are what a woman's right to choose means. When you do a personhood initiative, and this is written into the Constitution, you can't change it except to go back to the people to change it.
Certainly, any more than marijuana.
And you have
we have in the Constitution.
And it is a difficult thing. It's written in stone, so to speak. And these personhood amendments basically have huge unintended consequences. It can affect many types of birth control. It can affect a woman's right to choose, even in cases of rape and incest. All of these things are, in my opinion, what we as an electorate, and certainly women in this state, and I think across the country, consider extreme. And
well,
so I don't know how you can...
Let me go back on that. I actually don't think it's extreme, and I'll tell you why. So I think one of the areas that we see when life begins, and listen, I think I've been very close to it because my son's an in vitro baby. So if you want to look at when does life begin, assisted reproduction is very clear in terms of, now today we have 3D, 4D, that certainly when your eggs are taken and implanted and an embryo forms, that's life at the beginning of conception. I don't know how you really get around that. Where I think we have gray area and certainly some disagreement, and I think the assisted reproductive has been very instructional in this because they're very respectful of that, but they're also very respectful, certainly in the case I know that we experienced with my son on in vitro. Implant 3 embryos, maybe one lives, right? I really look at implantation and how that all happens. Now I have a different perspective because certainly I've had assisted reproduction for my son. But I don't think, frankly, that people of faith in the state or other people find it as extreme as the question of how will that play out. And I haven't always supported where the personhood amendment was in terms of its first round, its second round, because I was very concerned about in vitro, and there will be some forms of birth control that I would be concerned about, but that's not a given. I mean, I think we're bantering back and forth on, well, we think this could happen, maybe happen. But I think that the issue of respect for life in and of itself is extremely important. It's not extreme. I think that certainly we have the right to have these things on the ballot. This is one thing people love about Colorado. And I wasn't a fan of the marijuana initiative. I don't agree with it, but I will tell you, people have had the right to get those things on the ballot and have them voted on. Now, I think resoundingly, people have said, no, we're not going to have that. We don't want that right now in Colorado. But I don't see it as, well, I'm sorry, you should go away. That's not the American way. That's not Colorado way.
And I agree with you on that. I think everybody has a right to bring an issue to the ballot.
Absolutely.
And if they have enough signatures, they can get it done.
Sure.
I do think, however, that frequently what happens with initiatives now is that they're financed by outside interests and a lot of other very special interests that come up with the money. You almost have to have a certain amount of money to get signatures. I think when you've had a ballot issue like this that's been defeated overwhelmingly twice already in the last 4 elections, and you have it again, I think that's pushing. I think that's what you describe as attacks on women's rights, and well, I think that's what. Right. And so I think we have a right to say it's an attack on women's rights, and it is.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that viewpoint. I think it's an idea, some people believe, a religious freedom right and the right of one's debate and expression. I don't view it at all as an attack on women's rights, any more than when people overwhelmingly voted, and you and I, we've gone through this on the issue of civil unions. People voted on that in 2006 when I was elected, and here we go.
Okay,
so.
You're getting beyond the scope of
yes,
discussion.
all right,
on
women.
And really, I think we've all heard from the male candidates, from many of the men who've been writing the TV ads, from many of the men who sit on the editorial boards in the state and endorse candidates. We've heard a lot of messaging. And you earlier said the word manufactured. And I think both sides very much, you may disagree on lots of issues, but I think there's an agreement that there's a lot of manufacturing of message going on here. And I want to cite a couple examples. One, nationally, this well-known anti-Obama ad called The Breakup by Americans for Shared Prosperity. And it's a woman sitting on her couch, looking into the camera very intimately, talking about what you think is her boyfriend, who she describes as smart, handsome, charming, and articulate. She fell in love in 2008, and she said by 2012 our relationship was in trouble because he promised me he'd be better. And then she says, I know I'm stuck with Barack for 2 more years. I get that, but I'm not stuck with his friends. I'm looking for someone who gets that this isn't about him, it's about us. So I'm asking you both to kind of take off your partisan hats for a second and just forget that this is about Barack Obama, okay? That kind of ad, where a woman is discussing not just the president, but other politicians, meaning other people in the president's parties, equating them to love interests. I'm wondering how you feel about that. There's another ad by the college Republicans. It was a For Bob Beaupre ad, and it's very well known. A young woman is trying on wedding dresses. One wedding dress is a kind of frumpy, expensive, too big, doesn't fit, her friends hate it, wedding dress that's supposed to be the John Hickenlooper wedding gown. And then there's the strapless, fashionable number that she really wants to buy that's much less expensive, and that is the Bob Beaupre gown. And so what that really boils down to is, again, this insinuation that women are making political choices like they choose articles of clothing. So one ad framed it in terms of love interests, right? And the other ad framed it in terms of shopping, essentially. As women, when you see these ads, okay, and if you can please try to divorce yourself from who the ads are for and who the ads are against, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I guess your first reaction is that it is so absurd that it's slightly funny. But once you get past that and you think about it, and quite frankly, there's a lot of messaging that goes on television all of the time for all kinds of things, and I object frequently to what I think the tone of those ads are, which is demeaning to women. And you think about these 2 ads, they're very demeaning to why women make decisions about their voting, and why they stereotypes about what they like to do, like they like to talk about their boyfriends, and they like to go shopping, and that, even though we're facing some fairly important issues that people have to vote on in this election, they're thinking about dresses and boyfriends. And quite frankly, that just isn't true of women. Women are very perceptive voters. They vote well. So I'm offended to a large extent by that kind of stereotyping and the fact that somehow we have silly reasons for voting when in fact women do their homework and they vote for the right reasons. And so I'll leave it at that. I not to get terribly partisan about it, because that's what you didn't want us to do that. But women vote, in double-digit margins for our Democratic candidates, and I think it's because they don't do the kinds of things that you see in these ads in terms of stereotyping women. They stand up for their issues.
So your point is those are Republican ads?
Well, they are, yes. I mean, they clearly are Republican ads.
and that isn't a space you don't think Democrats tread?
No, I don't.
Well, I think one of the ads that you did leave out, because I was actually, first of all, I'd never seen the college ad on the wedding dress. I don't even know where that has originated in thought or reason.
Saturday Night Live.
So maybe it looked like it. I don't know. For a while I was trying to figure out what in the world was going on. I just thought it was ridiculous. But women were told in 2008 that this was the savior. And there were a lot of women gushing and oohing and this and that. And I, seriously, I thought, this is really insulting too. And so we are coming full circle on this. And I really do think overall, just the whole breakup and, that's not something I personally would respond to. But when you have shows like Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, and you have Jay Leno, Man on the Street, and half the people don't even know who the vice president is, and they can't barely name the president's wife, you get these things. Yeah. You get these things.
Well, and
I think it's insulting, but I think you get them. And I think, women, the women that I speak with and see, same as Dicky Lee, they're doing their homework. They're asking, they're talking to other women, but I think there is a disconnect. In other words, women were told in 2008, this is it, this is the best, this is, and you heard this. You heard it in Rolling Stone, you heard this in a lot of different magazines, and I think other women said, really? Really?
About Barack Obama.
Yeah, we're talking about the leader of the free world. Come on.
I'm not aware in the election in 2008 that was a huge discussion.
Oh.
At least with my friends, and there were some of us who chose to early on to support Barack Obama instead of Hillary Clinton. Mm. But those issues were very much identified in terms of what we thought he could do for the country, whether he could win or not, a number of things that brought us to that decision. And so I really discount talking about what happened in 2008 as somehow women falling in love with
I don't, because
Obama.
The media went over and over about just how cool and how suave and how, oh my, and we're also, we're just falling all over it. And see, I think that brings on this kind of thing, because people said, well, they voted for him in 2008, and they did again in 2012. So
you think the media created that?
I think media created a lot, and talking. Absolutely. We heard it, and you even heard it in prior to 2008. You heard it in 2004.
Well, and to a certain extent, I think this is an example of how I think Republicans tend to deal with women's issues. I think they're out of touch with what women really feel, and I think it's the reason that women tend to vote for Democratic candidates. All the polls that I see in Colorado, it's been that case for many years in elections, and it's been that way across the nation. And I think it's this kind of demeaning and stereotyping of women when they're not really coming to grips with what the average woman really is interested in terms of how she's going to vote. I don't think this will affect a certain
Do you
vote.
think there's a racial component to it?
I do. I think that particularly the ad about the boyfriend breaking up is both.
Oh, see, I don't at all.
Is both sexist and racial.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Let's hear her out.
No, it's ridiculous. I am stunned that you go there. I'm stunned that you tell me how you go there.
Let her explain.
Well, it has to do with something that's been an issue in racial politics for years, which is, I have to feel that ad was probably written by a white male who doesn't have any idea about how he really feels in his core, and it wasn't,
Oh yeah, it's all the angry white male.
Well, and quite frankly, I think that's what happens when you have somebody like that trying to figure out how they're going to impact women, and that's what's so offensive about it. It's this whole issue of race that has gone back a long ways relative to black sexuality and all of the things that ad implies. Once you think about it, is very, very offensive.
I've thought about it, and I think you're off the axis here. I actually don't know how you whittled down to some white male writing some ad. And I think it's unfortunate because that is the kind of stuff that people say, could we just have? This is what it is. I don't think there was some white male with these college kids sitting here directing them to do. I think they thought this might be fun and funny, and they really missed the mark. They really missed the mark.
Yeah.
But it is zero to do. It is zero to do with Republicans somehow being out of touch with women. And I would take umbrage because most of the women and Republican women that I talk to are saying the ads, particularly by your party, only have focused on one thing, and that's our reproductive system. And we have written, and I did an op-ed, it's been in the Statesman, I mean, a lot of women have said, they're thinking about so much more. They're thinking about their kids in college and college loans. They're thinking about the next job they might get, or their unemployed, sister.
There's a reason for that, though, and it stems largely, and let's now go to the Senate race, the race that you were once involved with.
Yes.
The issue of Representative Gardner's position or positions or ambiguity about personhood, which has really become a huge focal point in this race.
Well, no. I'm gonna start since I was the Senate candidate. First of all, I'm not a spokesman for Cory Gardner, and you and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
But this doesn't boil down to Cory's position on personhood. Frankly, I mean, Cory is a pro-life person. Cory respects life. But I think that after listening, and I think some of the issues Dicky Lee brought up, what would this do to in vitro fertilization in families who want to conceive, have reproductive assistance? Does a personhood amendment affect that? I don't know. That is, to me, I'm sure. Will it affect a woman's access to some contraception? I don't know under that. Will that? I don't know. And I think that after listening and talking to people, Cory said, I probably may have a change there. And so I think it's entirely possible for one to change one's viewpoint. Now, the issue, and I think you and I talked about this, is it evolved or is it flipping? And I say, look, I used to support choice. I mean, in terms of being really in my early 20s. But I had a change. And I had a change of viewpoint and heart on the subject.
Did you have a change because of your own experience with your son?
Yes, quite a bit. Well, not just that. I really started looking into it, and also evolved in terms of my own religious faith, which I'd really been away from. I worked in birth control. I worked for a Planned Parenthood type of organization.
Okay, I can hear about your change because it's your body.
Sure.
But what I'm interested in is Representative Gardner's change and the timing of it having to do with running for Senate.
Well, and I think, we all have issues that we concentrate on in elections. And this has been women's rights has been in the forefront of the national discussion and the state discussion in the last 2 years more than it has been in the past. And so I believe that every candidate should address those issues because they're very important electoral issues. Both the United States Congress and the state legislature will have much to say about women's rights and particularly reproductive rights over the next few years. And this issue has come up over and over again. Personhood has been defeated in the state legislature several times now in the last several years. It's come up many times. The same is true with the initiatives, the federal Congress. And this is where I think at least Senator Udall and many other candidates have a right to speak to the issue and to stand up for what they have stood up for many, many years, and to call into question a candidate who he has a right to change his mind, but right now it's very confused because he refuses to take his name off a federal personhood bill that is moving through Congress. And yet he talks about birth control over the counter, and maybe he's changed his mind on the initiative, which he didn't in the other two initiatives, which are virtually identical. So, and I want to get back to this whole business of you don't know what is in the personhood amendment. Quite frankly, Many experts have testified that, in fact, the language of that amendment would indeed affect in vitro fertilization, certainly could in terms of the way, would affect certain forms of birth control.
Well, some people weighing in. I don't think the jury's out. I think the jury's out.
And what we know about constitutional amendments, when those things are questioned in the Supreme Court is very clear. It's the language that rules. It's not the intent, and that's been the case. And so I think when you get down to that, I know we don't want to get into the minutia, but it's a very important distinction. That is a very serious amendment. It does go against women's rights.
So some key words have come up in the last couple of weeks. One is a word that popped up in the Denver Post's endorsement of Cory Gardner, and their description of Mark Udall's messaging about women as obnoxious, right? And then this week Hillary Clinton was in town and spoke really very directly to this debate going on in Colorado. I mean, that was not necessarily a national speech. It was a speech for Colorado, but she was saying these issues, these reproductive issues that are coming up, are the civil rights issues of our time. They're about freedom. And so on one hand we have this accusation that this is obnoxious, and on the other hand we have someone saying this is about the most core freedoms that we have on the planet. So,
well, first of all, I'd say that I think that statement is obnoxious. I think the obnoxious statement is definitely obnoxious, and I'm insulted, quite frankly, as a woman.
I'm insulted by it.
First of all,
you're insulted by what?
I am insulted, certainly by every time I turn the TV on. I think the Post had it right.
Okay. Well, and I'm not. And, quite frankly, I have listened to Mark Udall for a very long time in this campaign. And yes, he's made some very good points about women's rights. And yes, as I have said, that is a very, very important thing, not only to women, but to families and men and so forth. It's a very important issue that's come up in this campaign. Cory Gardner is all over the place on the issue. You don't know what he stands for as far as women's rights. I certainly don't. But Mark Udall, the Post is wrong to begin with. Mark Udall has talked about many other issues in the campaign, but he has talked about this issue because he has listened to many of his constituents and many women who are very, very concerned about this issue, and they're very concerned about how Cory Gardner stands on this issue. And that's what we do in campaigns. Now, I think it's very obnoxious that we have a group of people, a very extreme right group of people, who time and time again bring these personhood amendments that go against reproductive rights for women, which basically are the core rights for women, in my opinion. Choice is a very, very important right. It really takes women, it puts women on equal footing with men in terms of education and how they're going to raise their families and what jobs they can take and so many things like that. It is the core value as far as I'm concerned.
What's obnoxious?
Well, I think really it's no question that the majority of ads that Mark Udall has run has completely been about abortion, they're just going to go away. And women have said, look, Supreme Court has ruled on this. Abortion is here. It's not A, going away. And number two, neither is your ability to choose or your reproductive freedom. And so it's all been a big smokescreen. And where Cory is on women's rights, where Cory, at least in terms of some of the ads that I have seen and of knowing Cory and working with him, Cory wants job opportunities for women. Cory wants women to be able to, excel and go as far as they want to go. And frankly, it is not Cory who recommended pills being sold at King Soopers. It's ACOG. And if you look at the ACOG recommendation, which is really very clear.
Can you explain for people what ACOG is?
Yes, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology made this recommendation back in 2012. So this isn't something new. This is something that ACOG has been pushing for quite some time. And I think that always the devil is in the details. In any federal legislation, the devil would be in the details.
Okay, so I know you're not here as a proxy for Cory Gardner, and I'm not going there, but you were running in this race.
Yes,
and
right.
if you were still running in this race, if this were you,
Sure.
how would you do it differently? How would this sound different? How would this feel? How would the entire framework be different, or not? Or would it?
Well, I can't answer for the Dicky Lee's party. I still think they'd be doing a manufactured war on women. And by the way, when Hillary came here, Hillary was about Hillary. Hillary came here to talk about this because she wants to be sure that the manufactured war on women stays very healthy for the next 2 years till she runs for president. So I'm sorry. I think the premise of the question, and with all due respect, I think it's bothered you that Cory was endorsed by the Post. And frankly, the Post said to Mark Udall, why are you Johnny One Note on this? Why is it you continue to beat when women over here are talking about jobs, the economy, their kids' college loans, their debts? They're talking about all these other things. If I was still in the Senate race, I'm not really quite sure that I think people would still be saying, you voted for, something would be made up, because something's always made up.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it...
And you have a record.
Of course. And, here's the interesting thing. We had some pro-life bill by one of our members last session. I voted on the thing for women to be able to get and achieve, get the rape kit, should you. My colleagues voted that down because they wanted everybody politically to vote on a full bill. And so these games are played all the time. I think at the end of the day, I know my reproductive system better than Mark Udall. Finally, they're just fed up with it. Could you talk about something else? Mark Udall's ultimate demise, in my opinion, is because he votes with Barack Obama 99% of the time. And I think people want leadership. And so with ISIS, with Ebola, with all these things, people see America spinning off its axis.
So it sounds like that sort of sounds like a television ad to me.
But in my campaign, that's what I researched.
Right.
It started with me.
Well, and quite frankly, I don't consider Mark Udall Johnny One Note at all. He has spoken to and been very involved in so many issues on behalf of the state of Colorado, including the environment and protection of wilderness areas, and really fighting for women's rights when it comes to equal pay for equal work and other issues like that, where Cory Gardner has been nowhere. If anything, he has been on diminishing women's rights as it relates to getting birth control. He's diminished women's rights with regard to equal pay for equal work. He hasn't voted for any of those measures. So, I think you go too far in terms of trying to compare Cory Gardner as a strong representative of what Colorado needs, when we've had a United States Senator that has done many of those things and has talked about them. I think this is the echo chamber that you get when one media outlet and maybe some others talk about, well, this is the only thing Mark Udall is talking about, then it starts reverberating back and forth, when in fact that's not the case. And what he has said has been very, very important to me, very important to other women in the state, and I think we will find ultimately that he will win because of that.
I think if Mark Udall wins, it's because Democrats would have a better voter turnout methodology, and has zero to do with people in general going, oh yes, Mark. I actually think you have to look at the ads on TV, and over 90% of Mark's ads have been about reproductive. Whether he's talking about it on the campaign trail, fine. I think Cory has consistently been talking about jobs, the economy, leadership, and ultimately at the end of the day, you're right. We're going to see where it boils down to. Cory's 5 points ahead, depending on what poll you look at as of yesterday. But it's going to be neck and neck. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be very neck and neck.
So we have a week left, and this is now all about people who are undecided.
Right.
And do you think that there are folks who are undecided because of the mixed messaging and the blurred messaging around these very issues?
Well, I think this is one of them, and that always occurs in an election. There are mixed messages and there's confusion, but I think this is one, and I think that's why it's been discussed so much in this campaign. This is one where Cory Gardner is all over the place. I mean, I, as a woman, can't figure out where he stands. And this is not the first time that I have encountered that kind of issue from Cory Gardner. He's served in the legislature. Both Amy and I served with him. Mm-hmm. And I felt many times that the issues that he took were mere posturing because he was working on running for Congress or doing something else. And it's really clear, those are the kind of games that go on down there at the legislature, and Amy's very aware of that. So I think that's why this issue has become so important. I think those of us who are very concerned that there really is a war on women, and I absolutely don't think it's manufactured. When you have 6 states in the country that now have only one, and it's not just whether you're for or against abortion or whether you're for or against birth control. It's whether women actually have access and the right to both of those things. We have 6 states now that just over the last 5 years are down to only one clinic that provides for abortion. When you do away with those clinics, you also do away with women's ability to access birth control for a reasonable amount of money, cancer screenings, all kinds of things like that that are very, very important to women's health. And that's what's being affected by these personhood initiatives. And if you look at Texas, for instance, that is, the Supreme Court actually had to move in because there was going to be no access to clinics in Texas. So these things, in effect, are happening, and are happening at a much higher rate than they were when I was working on women's rights in the 1970s. I mean, this is a huge step back for both the country and for our state and for women. And I feel very, very personally about that because it's been something that I've worked on all of my life. It's not the only issue I've worked on. I have many other things I've worked on. But this is key and very important for my daughter, for our granddaughters, for their ability to have equal footing and equal opportunity when it comes to education and jobs and all of those things that we all want to see for them.
Representative Stevens, you mentioned Hillary Clinton and what you perceive as a desire to keep this perceived war on women mm-hmm. going to 2016. Mm-hmm. How do you see this playing out in the next 2 years? Is the volume going to increase? Is the volume going to decrease? And also, will you two join me in 2 years, a week before the election, and have the same discussion again? And will that discussion be any different?
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. I want to respond, though, to what Dicky Lee said, because I've worked for women's rights since 1970s as well. Past 70s, probably 80s, because I got out of college in 1980. But really, I think that people don't wake up in the morning just thinking, where can I get an abortion? It's not something always talked about. We think abortion, anytime, any place, Americans are uncomfortable with. I don't know women who view abortion as their access to education. I think that job, opportunity, culture, family, education, all those things combine together to be very important to women and their ability to move ahead. I think the war on women, though, really goes in terms of opportunities for women. I just saw a number of women from all different countries here with Denver World. Alice Brodkin had brought them to the Capitol, and they're not talking about abortion.
Well,
what they're talking about is, I want to, how did you run for office? How did you get ahead? Where did you get your education? And it was to me, I almost wanted to cry because these women are so strong, and they've had different obstacles than some of us have had. And all I wanted to do was wrap my arms around them and say, yes, you can do it. Go for it. And in my mind, that to me is something that my party wishes, my party wants. And I just think we have been overly bogged down. And this is why I think that this, I call it the manufactured war on women, and many of my women colleagues and many women I speak with believe that. They want to see opportunities. As we mentioned, they want their daughters to go to med school. They want their daughters to be attorneys. They want their daughters to have that. Now, does that mean, Hillary isn't going to talk about those things? I don't know what Hillary's going to talk about. But what I do know is that it serves a certain purpose to keep that going. And so I think it's mostly, maybe to help Mark, but more about her running in 216.
Interesting.
Well, and I just have to respond to that. I mean, when I talk about women's reproductive rights and women's health issues and the right to choose, I don't mean only that every woman has a right to have an abortion every time she wants to. That is only a very small part of that issue. Women's primary control over their own bodies, their right to control their own bodies, is a very fundamental right before you can have any other kinds of rights. You have to be able to be on equal foot. Men have had the right to control their bodies for centuries. Mm-hmm. This is something we are trying to provide to women. I thought we won this battle back in the 1980s. I thought choice was no longer an issue. With all of and that's why, how can you say that this issue is manufactured when we have personhood amendments on the ballot who go to that very issue, when we have bills being introduced in our legislature and all over the country? More bills have been passed in the last 10 years than the 10 years before that restrict women's right to choose. So it's not just having an abortion on demand, it's all of these fundamental rights that this is one of the major rights that you have as a woman.
I want to wrap this up with this question. We heard in that breaking up with Barack Obama ad, he just doesn't get it, right? Mm-hmm. He just doesn't get it. He's a man, he just doesn't get it. And we also heard more locally, because this is not just a national issue, and it's not just a statewide race mm-hmm. issue. It was an issue in State House District 3, mm-hmm. Representative Daniel Kagan's district, where he's being opposed by Republican Candace Bench, who put out a flyer that said, the politicians in Denver and Washington just keep fighting back and forth about our personal reproductive rights. They're yours, they're mine, they're yours, they're mine. Many of these politicians are men like Dan Kagan. They just don't understand, and they never will. What I find interesting about that flyer is there is, number one, a flat out, it's not just an implication, it's an assertion that because Daniel Kagan is a man, or in the case of the Obama ad, mm-hmm. because Barack Obama is a man, mm-hmm. they just can't get it. They just don't get it, okay? Because we're really talking about, largely, I understand Candace Bench is a woman and she's running, and I think we all agree we'd like to see more women running for these mm-hmm. seats. But this assertion that because they're men, they just don't get these issues. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's unfortunate. The fact of the matter is that there's nothing in that statement that she made that indicated where she stands on this issue. And right. I happen to know that she hasn't explained herself on where she stands on this issue. Dan Kagan, on the other hand, she has not taken a position other than...
Well, she has said safe, legal, and rare. She has said it, but she's not said it loudly. And Daniel Kagan has said very loudly mm-hmm. that he's pro-choice.
Yes, and he's been endorsed by NARAL and Planned Parenthood every single time he's run. As the chair of the Judiciary Committee last year, he has a very good record, and it was in his committee where the personhood bill last year was defeated in the State House. And there is, I think, I'm glad you brought that up, because what's interesting, there's this organization called Colorado Women's Alliance. I don't know whether you're a member of that either.
I'm not, Colorado Women's Alliance is with Debbie Brown. I don't think they have memberships. But I certainly have participated and do support them. I think they're doing a fabulous job throughout Colorado, mostly looking at independent voters and women's issues there. I think Candace has been actually very upfront about where she stands. Candace is different than I. I mean, I think I'm probably to the right of Candace. So
she is, but there was an implication in that flyer when she says, many of these politicians are men like Dan Kagan. They just don't understand, and they never will. And as I wrote in the Colorado Independent, the flyer kind of looked like an early pregnancy test. It had that kind of, general aesthetic to it. And there was very much an implication that this man, because he's a man, is anti-choice. And as you said, she said nothing about where
See,
her
I don't
position
read
is.
this that way.
This is my question.
Yeah,
What I want to get back to, and I want to wrap this up with this question, is in both of those ads, nationally with Obama and in Colorado State House District 3, there is this rep that the men don't get it. I'd like you to just end the interview by telling me, can the men get it? Do the men get it? Are the men getting it?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I would say about Mark Udall. He gets it. He understands how important this issue and other women's issues are. And so does Dan Kagan, so does my husband, so do many men I work with, and I know Amy believes that too. Just because you're either a man or a woman doesn't mean that you can't act on these issues appropriately.
Yeah,
important.
my husband gets it. I think, I think Cory Gardner understands, and I think the man I served with, Frank McNulty, I think he understands. And I think there's a number of men that are my colleagues that understand. Some do, and some don't. Same as I'm sure Dicky Lee can say, some of my guys, they don't get it either. But I think at the end of the day, no one wins. I mean, I said to you, I don't think Democrat women or Republican women in a lot of the ads are completely served or served well. And I think you said so many are manufactured perhaps by men and, maybe tested. But I actually, some of the ones that I've seen, I kind of look and go, okay, maybe it's me. I'm just too into this. It doesn't really speak to me. Now, it might speak to someone else. But I don't think in this roar of all of this, everyone is served. And, at the end of the day, it's what politics is. It is that roar.
Yeah.
It is those ads. It is all the, I don't read this as you do. And I didn't see this flyer. But I don't read it, and I don't take it the same way you do. And I think that Candace is an excellent candidate, and she'd be an excellent woman legislator. And Candace is, working in construction with a hard hat on her head. So let's just remember that Candace understands the value of hard work, and I think she'll make an excellent legislator. But overall, you want kind of this finale. I don't think a lot of these ads that you had sent to me or that you've brought up, I don't necessarily think they're great for Democrat nor Republican women. And maybe they're all aimed at the independent women, and we'll see how the independent women votes.
Well, clearly all ads are aimed at the undecided, and frequently those are unaffiliated men and women. And so I think maybe that's what these ads were directed at. But I have to agree with you, Amy, that the ads that we've seen, that we've talked about here, aren't going to impact that. They're going to impact it, for instance, they will impact women's vote negatively, it seems to me. So I think they're smarter than that. I think they get this, and I think that's quite frankly the reason that Republicans are having a hard time getting the women's vote, is I think they tend to use this a little bit more. But I agree with Amy, all of them are, I'm not sure that any of them impact me to any large extent. They may impact some of the unaffiliated folks. I think that the women will vote because they look at the candidates and they will pick the right one and for their issues, and they do that very appropriately, and a lot of them are going to vote, and hopefully in a week we'll know how that worked out.
We'll see.
Before you start disagreeing, while you're agreeing, I'm going to end this interview and say thank you both so much for coming and talking about this from a women's perspective, which really is quite refreshing this election season. Again, we are the Colorado Independent. We are a nonprofit online news site. We're at www.coloradoindependent.com. please check out what we're writing, please check out what we're covering, and I'd love to have this discussion in 2 years. I hope you join me.
Okay, thank you.